thank you for joining us online today. On behalf of my co-lead, Professor Leonie Ryan, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our very first webinar hosted by the Inclusive Energy Transition Cluster of the IUCN WCEL Climate Change Law Specialist Group on global perspectives on an inclusive energy transition. My name is Madeline Taylor, co-lead of our Inclusive Energy Transition Cluster, Associate Professor of Energy Law at Macquarie University, Australian Research Council Industry Fellow, and co-stream leader of the Transforming Energy Markets Research Centre. Our Inclusive Energy Transition Cluster explores the regulatory and policy challenges driving the shift to sustainable energy systems. We focus on the legal tools that enable green technologies and examine the barriers, particularly around equity and inclusion, that may create challenges or opportunities in the energy transformation through crafting effective regulation and policy. And if you have not joined our cluster already as a member, Roberta will place the email in the chat where you can join us. Our webinar discussion today recognizes the premise that the energy transition is not purely technocratic. Inclusion needs to be a cornerstone of the energy transition, and we've been operating within the paradigm of the energy trilemma in energy law for far too long, focusing only on energy security, sustainability, and affordability, without thinking of the fourth dimension in the energy quadrilemma of justice. The quadrilemma is now reaching prominence within international energy circles, and it is telling that exactly 1 year ago today, in May 2024, the International Energy Agency released its strategy for affordable and fair clean energy transitions, finally recognizing the multidimensional nature of the energy transition. This is a social challenge with energy not just as a commodity, but as a right. While we have the EU Just Transition Fund and COP28's Just Transition Declaration, in other corners of the globe, the just transition targets are being abandoned, scaled down, and defunded. For example, the US has just backed out of the Just Energy Transition partnerships with Indonesia, Vietnam, and South Africa. It is also true that a universal blueprint for the energy transition does not exist. The journey towards a just and inclusive energy transition looks very different from one region to another. And in recognition of this, each of the regions around the globe brings its own legal, economic, and social realities, as well as unique strengths and innovations. And in this vein, today's webinar is designed to meet and really spark meaningful discussion around this complex web of regional energy transitions. We're going to take a closer look at 6 key regions: Latin America, the Asia Pacific, Southeast Asia, the EU, the UK, and Africa, to explore how energy transitions are unfolding through the lens of inclusivity. By hearing directly from our regional experts, we'll gain deeper insights into the challenges, opportunities, and lessons emerging around the world, and how we can work together to build a more equitable and resilient global energy future. We are very fortunate to be joined by our 6 expert speakers online, each of them representing one of these regions. We have Camila Ramirez from Baker McKenzie, Colombia, representing Latin America, Professor Trevor de Winterbottom from the University of Waikato, New Zealand, Dr. Desiree Rugara-Gaza, who is from the Commonwealth Secretariat of the United Kingdom, Jacqueline Adam from Exitant Group in South Africa, representing Africa, Dr. Laura Sannes-Kashani from the Erasmus School of Law in the Netherlands, representing the European Union, Dr. Mohammed Hazrati from the National University of Singapore, representing the region of Southeast Asia. Our speakers today will be speaking for strictly 5 minutes on their each respective region. We have an alarm clock which will sound, hopefully not too rudely, at the end of each of the 5-minute sessions. And the second half of our webinar today will feature a structured panel discussion chaired by my wonderful co-lead, Professor Leonie Ryans. And we're going to explore a series of provocative and timely questions. So please do stay engaged and feel free to engage within the chat throughout the webinar. It's now my absolute pleasure to hand over to Professor Francesco Sindico, who is co-chair of the IUCN WCEL Climate Change Law Specialist Group, for his opening remarks. Thank you, and over to you, Francesco.
Thank you very much, Madeline. And I'm really, really happy to have the opportunity in just a minute or two really to introduce this first webinar. Some of us on the call, Roberto, Marina, have been last week together at the World Environmental Law Congress of IUCN WCL in Rabat. And And we were introducing to participants at the Congress this revamped structure of the WCL Climate Change Law Specialist Group. And this is really the first kickoff. It's like we're really starting to run now. The revamped structure means that me and the other co-chair, Fabiano De Andrade, realized, well, maybe it's not rocket science, but still, that having one specialist group on something as wide and broad as climate change law, as interesting as it may be, was just not working just as one thing. Our specialist group is big. It has more than 400 members. Our network on LinkedIn has more than 500 members. Those of you who are in the audience who want to join, you're always welcome to join. But it was just becoming too convoluted and too big. So we have decided to frame our work around 5 clusters. The inclusive energy transformation cluster led by Madeline and Leonie is one of them, but we have also other 4 clusters: a litigation cluster, ocean and islands cluster, nature-based solutions cluster, and cities cluster. So again, those in the audience or even the speakers in front of me, if you do want to know more about any cluster or want to join them, you're more than welcome. And also what I'm delighted, and I think one of the speakers was just talking about it when we were preparing for this. It's great to start with such a wonderful webinar that brings people from all the different time zones, all the different parts of the world, and in a very dynamic way. I'm sure this will be exciting, will be interesting, obviously very topical, but I'm delighted and I really would like to congratulate from the start Madeline, Leonie, and everybody behind them for such a fantastic format and such a dynamic webinar that I'm sure we'll all enjoy. I will stop there because I'm really just very keen to hear our fantastic speakers, but not without thanking Marina Duta Trinidade and Roberto Col, who behind the scenes are also helping in promoting the webinar and in working around it. The idea is, but Madeline and Leonie can confirm, that this is not just a one-off. There will be a number of other events from the cluster. There will be meet and greets, another webinar, possibly together with the other clusters, but also a document that will come out from this, that obviously WCL, Climate Change Law Specialist Group, will work with the cluster leads to promote it as widely as possible. So I will leave it to that. I will give the floor back to Madeline to chair it, and I will be on the chat, encouraging you to introduce yourselves, to talk to you in the chat. We're all very good at multitasking nowadays, so I'm sure you can focus and concentrate on the speakers, but also share who you are and what you're doing on the chat. Thank you very much, Madeline.
Thank you very much, Francesco. Well, it is my absolute pleasure to start our discussions on the very important region of Latin America and invite Camila Jimenez from Latin America, of course, representing Colombia from Baker McKenzie, to please have the floor to discuss her region. Thank you, and over to you, Camila.
Thank you very much for the invitation to participate as a speaker in this webinar. It is an honor to contribute to such an important conversation and to share perspectives from Colombia and Latin America on how we can shape a more inclusive, just, and sustainable energy future. Well, Colombia and in general the Latin America region, rich in natural resources, cultural diversity, and economic potential, stand at a critical stage in the global fight against climate change. An inclusive energy transformation is not just an economic need, it's a social imperative to ensure equitable progress for all. Latin America contributes only to approximately 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. However, it is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, rising levels, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss threaten millions of livelihoods in this region. From my perspective, to achieve an inclusive energy transformation, it is important to align global best practices with local realities, prioritizing social equity, economic development, and environmental stewardship. First, let's see the global perspective. It is widely known that the International Energy Agency and the United Nations have indicated that the transition to net zero emission by 2050 requires a significant scaling up of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and electrification. For Latin America, of course, this means leveraging its abundant solar, wind, and hydroelectric resources. Globally, countries, for example, like Denmark or Germany, have shown that regulation or policy innovation, such as feed-in tariffs and public-private partnership, can accelerate renewable adoption. But of course, these models can support Latin America, but they must be adapted to address local challenges like regulatory fragmentation, communities, and the financial gaps. Second, inclusivity is the foundation of a just energy transition. In Colombia and in general in Latin America, energy poverty remains a reality. More or less over 20 million people in the region lack access to reliable electricity, specifically in rural areas and the indigenous communities. An inclusive transformation means prioritizing these marginalized groups. For example, in Colombia, the program Energía para la Paz, or Energy for the Peace, has brought solar microgrids to off-grid communities in conflict-affected areas, empowering local communities and fostering peace building. Also in Brazil and Peru, they have implemented community-led renewable projects that respect indigenous land rights and cultural values. Energy communities or community-led energy projects are increasingly being used in Latin America as a tool to build more resilient and inclusive electricity systems. These initiatives look to provide long-lasting energy solutions built on promoting active community participation in all the phases of a project. In parallel with other existing policy efforts, these initiatives are helping address a range of challenges in the energy sector, including energy poverty, the continued use of contaminating fuels for electricity generation, and poor reliability of the electricity grid. However, while many communities are eager to take on these initiatives, it is important to address that the operational challenges they may face, such as, for example, lack of technical expertise, financial mismanagement, and logistics of ongoing maintenance requirements. Clearly defining roles and laying out a financial plan is crucial for the long-term success of energy communities. While these initiatives align with the global framework like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, number 7, which calls for affordable and clean energy for all, there are still another challenges derived from the socioeconomic dimension of the transition that we have to take into account. Latin America's energy sector employs millions, mainly in fossil fuel industries. Colombia, for example, in this case, has long relied on oil mining, which account for more than half of the country's exports. A just transition requires skilling programs and economic diversification to protect workers. Globally, countries like Canada and South Africa have implemented transition funds to support fossil fuels workers moving into clean energy jobs. In Colombia, despite some progress on the energy transition away from fossil fuel, there is a lack of clarity at the national level on what this transition should look like and how economical, social, and environmental institutional change might happen. Another challenge that I see is financial, which is a critical bottleneck. Global mechanisms like the Green Climate Fund and other blended finance models can help, but domestic policies and regulation must also incentivize private investment. Additionally, governance must improve. Corruption scandals in energy projects across the region undermine trust and progress. Finally, regional cooperation is key. Latin America's energy markets are divided by initiatives like the Andean Electrical Interconnection System and Mercosur's energy integration efforts show promise. By sharing resources and knowledge, countries can optimize renewable deployment and grid resilience. Colombia, with its strategic geographic position and renewable potential, can lead this charge, fostering a regional model for inclusive transformation. In conclusion, an inclusive energy transformation in Colombia and Latin America in general is not just a regional goal, it is a global need. And by aligning global perspective with local communities, we can build a future where clean energy powers equitable growth, protects vulnerable communities, and preserves our planet for generations to come.
Thank you, Camilla, for starting us off in such a beautiful and holistic way, stemming not only from the transition, the physical transition, the system transition, but also on the financing side. It's now my great pleasure to invite Professor Trevor Dyer Winterbottom representing the Asia Pacific region from the University of Waikato, New Zealand, to the floor. Thank you, Trevor.
Kia ora, kia ora tātou katoa. Thank you, Madeline, and thank you, Francesco. It's a great pleasure to be with you this evening. What I want to do is to focus perhaps the diversity of the Asia Pacific region and to focus on islands, which are a real issue in the region in terms of providing energy at real cost in a just and sustainable way. The case study that I'm going to talk to relates to the most remote part of New Zealand, the Chatham Islands. They lay out in the Pacific, some 785 kilometres from mainland New Zealand. There are 2 islands in the group, and together they cover an area of almost 1,000 square kilometres, and the islands have a population of just under 700 people. In terms of their energy needs have been met traditionally by diesel-fueled generators, with the fuel supplied coming from mainland New Zealand by ship. There is a single ship that services the islands, which is now approximately 39 to 40 years old. It spends more time in repair than it does in service. In terms of the impact of that method of energy supply, there's no supply for the agricultural industry on the islands, which is mainly sheep and beef production. So when it comes to time to take the sheep and beef to market, the probability of there being a ship to service it or anything to do with the sheep or beef if the ship doesn't arrive is a real dilemma. There isn't sufficient power to run an abattoir. There's no sufficient power to run a freezing works. There's no sufficient power to do anything apart from simply slaughter animals and leave them to rot on farm. In terms of supplying the islands with power, there's been a number of schemes or proposals that have been brought forward, largely relating to wind generation. The problem there has been a real problem of striking a balance between government expenditure and private funding in terms of public-private ventures. There's been an unwillingness on the part of the New Zealand government to invest heavily in renewable energy in the Chatham Islands because of the cost involved. An initial scheme of 2 wind turbines were installed on the island together with a battery system to improve power supply in 2010. But by 2014, the 2 turbines were removed together with those parts of the battery equipment that could also be removed from the islands, because the private company involved in the public-private venture with the New Zealand government had gone into liquidation. There was then a commitment more recently under the previous government to invest in a scheme of 3 wind turbines and also a battery system on the islands, costing around $11 million. The cost of that has now gone up to $17 million, and the latest proposal from the government is that the Islands Council should put a bid in to a regional development fund operated by the government to pay the cost or part of the cost for those wind turbines. That system alone will not meet the entire energy needs of the island, and certainly won't meet the needs of both the resident population, any growth in tourism, or anything to support the agricultural industry on the islands. So it's a real dilemma in terms of how the system operates here, and at the real base of it is a cost of investment. when one looks at the equity of the power prices paid by the islanders on the Chathams, they're paying something like $1.29 per kilowatt hour, compared with 35 cents, which is the average paid in mainland New Zealand. In terms of the costings, the costings vary between $17,000 to $50,000 per household if the island population was to attempt to try and finance things in some other way. So at the heart of the dilemma across the Pacific, I think the real issue is one of matching venture capital with technology. The technology is available, but it appears that the willingness of governments to really support that is perhaps lacking.
Thank you very much, Trevor.
Tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for also highlighting the decarbonisation of hard to abate sectors like agriculture, which of course historically has been very difficult, particularly in New Zealand and other economies heavily dependent on agriculture. It is now my great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Desiree Rurangaraza, who is representing the United Kingdom from the Commonwealth Secretariat. Please, Desiree, it's my pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Madeleine, for giving me the floor. Yeah, it's interesting to look at this subject because it matters to the whole world. And looking at the UK aspect, I'm going just to talk about the UK and then move to the Commonwealth, and then see how I can just ramp up everything. The UK's inclusive energy transformation focuses on ensuring everyone's benefit from the transition to low carbon energy, and addressing energy poverty and promoting equitable access to energy technology and policies. This involved not only reducing reliance on fossil fuels, but also ensuring that low-income households and communities are not left behind. So there are key aspects of inclusive energy transformation in the UK. First of all, they are looking at addressing energy poverty. The UK faces challenges ensuring the low-income household that can afford to heat their homes and access essential energy services. Inclusive energy policies aim to reduce energy bills and improve energy efficiency in low-income homes. However, is it happening like that way? Yeah, I know about it because my pocket is feeling the heat. So supporting energy flexibility as well is part of the key aspect the UK is looking at. Making energy flexibility access to all is crucial for managing demand and supply and ensuring that the benefit of smarter energy systems are shared by all. This includes initiatives like smart building systems that can manage energy consumption and reduce costs for consumers. The third aspect and key aspect is promoting inclusive innovation. Innovation in the energy sector must be inclusive, ensuring that new technologies and policies benefit all, not just the wealthiest. These include developing easy-to-use product and inclusive consumer experiences. And community engagement, whatever we are talking about here, if we do not include the community, I don't think that we are going to achieve anything. So local authorities play a crucial role in shaping local energy systems and ensuring that residents and businesses are involved in the transition. These include developing energy communities where residents can share renewable energy and reduce cost. There are many case studies that we can use here, but the time doesn't allow to look into that. And data management and policy alignment. A robust data management system and clear policies are needed to track progress identify challenges, and ensure that the transition is inclusive and equitable. Data. Here, we need to look at data again. Capacity building and public education. Providing training and resources for public servants, as well as educating the public about the benefit of the transition, is essential for successful implementation. If that is not done, so we need to look at it holistically. If we do not look at it holistically, I don't think that we are going to address the challenges. Add as well the north-south divide and urban-rural divide. These are very important aspects that everyone and every organization should look at to see how we can address the north-south divide. So in terms of what the Commonwealth is doing, and the Commonwealth is a very, very a good example to look at because it comprises 56 countries. And the 56 countries we have amongst them developed countries and those which are not developed. So spanning both from developed and developing countries, including small island developing states, resource-rich African nations, and industrialized states like Canada and the UK. Well, if you look at the Commonwealth, again, it's 30, we have, wow, 33 countries are small islands, and we have 21 African countries located in sub-Saharan Africa, 8 Asian countries, including India, that is emitting a lot of gas, GHGs. And if you look at that, the Commonwealth had decided to put together 3 pillars to look at that inclusivity: inclusive transition, technology transition, and enabling frameworks to be able to manage all of that. However, in terms of energy justice, if you look at it, I gave you just a simple example. There is a population, a New York population of 19.9. They use, that's a million people. They use 2,050 kilowatt per capita, whilst in sub-Saharan Africa, where the population is 791 million, we have 50 kilowatt per capita. So where is energy transition? I think that is where things start to hit, and we have a lot to discuss about it. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Desiree. Thank you for bringing in the complex mosaic of the Commonwealth and the different legal responsibilities there, and also the focus on consumer energy resources. Thank you very much. That was fascinating. It's now my great pleasure to hand over to Jacqueline Adams, who will be discussing the region of Africa, building beautifully from Desiree's segue from the Commonwealth African states there. Over to you, Jacqueline. I think you might be on mute there, Jacqueline.
There we go.
Thank you.
Okay. Madeleine, can you confirm all is ready?
Yes, although we can't see any slides as yet.
Oh. Thank you very much. Thank you for setting the scene for the previous speakers. And I think I've got a specific inclination to the South America presentation by Camila, because part of the challenges that we face in Africa, and specifically South Africa, is very much related to what is in Latin America. So just looking at the specific South African scene, we are seeing that South Africa is a signatory to the Paris Agreement since 2015, and the need for transition to a low economy and climate resilient society has been adapted in the position framework that we've got in South Africa, referred to as the Just Transition Framework, which was adopted by the Parliament in 2022. Now, linked to that, and since then, there's been updated critical policies that has enabled the development of a more effective climate change response. And just to name a few of them, the Electricity Regulator Act, which allow for uncapped power generation for independent power productions. And then we also have the revision of the National Determined Contributions. And the aim of that is to raise South Africa's ambition for reducing its emissions. And then key aspect is the Just Energy Transition Partnership with Germany, the UK, France, the US, and as well as the European Union. Now, this partnership links up with a previous discussion and presentation from the UK. And this will assist the South Africa in transitioning away from fossil fuels towards more clean energy resources. Just some focus on the current energy sources in South Africa. There is a heavy reliance on coal, and there is an accounting for 70% of the current electricity generation is on coal, while renewable energy is only a contribution of 12%. In South Africa in 2021, the statistics was that 245,000 gigawatt hours of electricity is coal-fired power plants, therefore remaining a significant source of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and mercury emissions, which underscores the urgency for the transitioning to a cleaner energy. The development of the Renewable Energy Independent Producer Procurement Program has attracted over $20 billion in investment. And the aim is to integrate 17.8 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030 with this program. And the current capacities include about 2,500 megawatts of solar PV and 3,670 megawatts of wind energy, with the projections targeting 40% renewable energy by 2030. And that is guided by the adopted integrated resource plan. So the challenges we face, like I said earlier on, is very much related to what is currently experienced in Latin America. And it mainly deals with the lack of the regulatory capacity, as well as market players to effectively access and utilize the available subsidies and links to these fundings. So many of the subsidy programs are actually designed with the assumption of existing infrastructure, which is very often in the rural areas of South Africa, and the same for the rest of Africa. They are not available. So there's less access to developing nations where this infrastructure may not be in place. In the rural areas, which is a contradiction to the cities within these countries. And then we have policymakers needing to consider the specific needs and circumstances of the developing nations, and then tailoring policies accordingly. And again, we need to consider the difference between cities and rural areas within the African context. So the green technology subsidies are very often designed for specific technologies. And that includes electric vehicles or solar panels, which may not be readily available or affordable in the countries of Africa, and specifically even in Southern Africa. So just looking at going forward, there is a total need for inclusive energy solutions, where you need to look at the socioeconomic aspects as well as the environmental aspects. And these would include rural electrification disparities. And again, that highlights the gaps between electrification between the cities and the rural areas, energy poverty, a requirement for decentralized systems to create social equity, the adoption of the regulatory frameworks, And then key aspect is fostering of public-private partnerships for infrastructure development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. And the discussion around rural versus urban transitions and how we produce energy for whom and how we transmit energy is, I'm sure, an interesting discussion. Thank you for raising that. That we'll pick up in the statement section of the webinar. It's now my great pleasure to hand over to Laura Sanaz-Kashni from the Erasmus School of Law in the Netherlands, representing the EU region. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you for having me. I already see that a lot of the aspects that we're facing in the EU are already coming up in other discussions. So it is truly a global discussion, the same way that this is really a global webinar. So thanks for having me. And I think when it comes to the EU, I think we're seeing two different aspirations of the energy transition. One is the policy framework, which I think we all know as the European Green Deal, really the flagship of the EU as it wants to become a global leader in the global energy transition. And here we really see the wording coming back. I mean, we're all lawyers, so we all pay a lot of attention to how things are framed. And if you look at it, the wording is really this like whole of economy approach. They talk about a gradual transition, a just transition, socially accepted, socially fair. It is very broad and very inclusive, which is not necessarily something that is translated into the law. So if you look at the policy framework, you see really this broad definition of a just transition. But then when you look at the law, it is a much narrower definition with very specific focus points. And just to highlight a few, when you look at one of the main electricity regulations, it actually tries to define what a just transition is, which I think is already quite difficult. But then if you look at the wording, it really goes away from this like fair and just transition overall, and it talks about a just transition in the coal regions. And this is really, Netherlands already has mentioned it in her opening, the Just Transition Fund in the EU with 20 billion euros available for a just transition is really one of the main financing mechanisms that we find in the EU. But also if you actually look at how the money then is allocated, you see that a lot of it goes back to countries like Germany, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, which are the coal regions of the EU. And I think if we look at the question of a just transition, this seems to be very historically informed because the EU traditionally has very strong unions. We find very strong unions in these coal-dependent regions. So when we talk about making it socially acceptable, then we talk a lot about making sure that it's politically accepted, also in the most vulnerable regions. And then one other aspect that I think is really going more to one of the really central questions of the just transition, that is financing the transition. That is the question of energy poverty or affordability in general. But if you look at the approach of the Green Deal so far and the law that came from it, is we are focusing mainly on affordability in the context of energy poverty. So really those vulnerable consumers who cannot pay their electricity bill, which I'm very happy to discuss more also later in the discussion. But one of the mechanisms of the EU is to have the middle class kind of like finance the green technologies by adopting and investing in these technologies. And I think with the Clean Industrial Deal, which just was published by the new commission now in February, we see actually a little revolution in that regard. Going from a commission who kind of never tried to use the word energy services have to be affordable to always based on market mechanisms, it is the first time where the European Commission really acknowledges that we have an affordability issue in the EU. And it highlights it still very much in the context of the industry, with the new focus of really making the EU a global competitor and a global leader in the energy transition. But going from not mentioning affordability almost at all to now having an action plan for affordability, which is again very much policy and not law yet, I think that is quite a big stretch for the European Union. And it really acknowledges the fact that the European Union has traditionally been an area in the world where we have higher energy prices. While it doesn't necessarily answer yet all the financial issues that we're going to face with the transition. I think in the Netherlands alone, we are expecting network tariffs alone, so the network charges for the industry, to go from 7 billion euros annually to 25 billion euros. So we really see households being affected by the transition. It at least is the starting point of a discussion of how do we more generally expect the costs and the consumers to carry the transition, which I think at the end of the day is the make or break point for just energy transition in the Netherlands or in the EU in general. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and for keeping under time. I feel you deserve a gold star for that. Thank you very much, and for, of course, raising this critical point around how we structure energy systems, for what and for whom, moving away from a linear, centralized model to finding system services, capacity mechanisms to provide inertia, and what that looks like in a way that funnels in, of course, low emissions technologies. So a very important point to raise. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, I'm thrilled to introduce Dr. Mohammed Hazrati, who will be representing the region of Southeast Asia. Of course, Dr. Hazrati is at the National University of Singapore, and I'm very much looking forward to his comments. Over to you, Mohammed.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. And thank you for inviting me and for the opportunity to speak today. What I want to do is to begin my first 5-minute presentation by clarifying what I mean by a just transition and how this concept is reflected in Southeast Asia region. As many of you already know, the concept of just transition began in the 1970s with labor unions aiming to protect workers affected by environmental regulation. Today, the concept has evolved, especially in the context of climate change and energy transition, and it's often used in two ways. Narrowly, to address job losses during the shift to a low-carbon economy, and more broadly, to consider wider social, environmental, and economic justice issues. In my opinion, a truly and genuine just transition goes beyond workers' rights. It must address inequality, especially how vulnerable countries and segments of society bear the brunt of climate and energy transition policies. This broader approach gaining traction in research and policy, and it's supported by a framework which is called JUST framework, which includes 5 dimensions of justice, including distributive, procedural, recognition, restorative, and cosmopolitan justice. The framework helps ensure the term does not become an empty buzzword. This is particularly important because of the long and complex history of justice-related debates. So the framework actually gives just transition a concrete meaning in practice. I won't go in detail here, but I would be happy to explain more if anyone is interested later. Now, with this background in mind, I want to stress that I support a comprehensive approach, one that is backed by a clear evaluative framework, a well-defined process, and a strong mechanism for determining and upholding responsibilities. When it comes to Southeast Asia, we can see that this broader understanding, like in many other countries and regimes, has been gaining more attention. However, the pace which is being broadly applied and is slow, and the frameworks that have been adopted are sometimes flawed. 2 very important examples from this region are the Indonesia and Vietnam Just Energy Transition Partnership and the very recent development of the ASEAN plan of action for energy cooperation. I just explained the first one. I'll leave the second for the rest of the webinar. ASEAN is indeed a regional group of 10 Southeast Asian countries founded in 1967 to promote economic, social, and political cooperation. However, regarding the energy cooperation, ASEAN has the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, which serve as a roadmap for the energy region's energy goals. The plan updated every 5 years. So far, 4 versions have been adopted, and the current one ends this year. What is important for today here is that the new theme for the upcoming plan of action, which was recently endorsed by the ASEAN energy ministers, reflects the broader definition of just transition. The theme is advancing regional cooperation in ensuring energy security and accelerating decarbonization for a just and inclusive energy transition. Following this announcement, Austrian Center for Energy released a guideline, including, 9 principles of just energy transition, 10 principles, including affordability, accessibility, energy security, sustainability, fair cost, benefit distribution, inclusive participation, recognition and empowerment, fair economic growth, gender equality, and intergenerational equity. However, significant concerns remain about achieving truly just transition in the region, which I will address later. Thank you.